We're Amy and Christina, two moms who learned the hard way that there's a lot we wish we knew about pregnancy and parenting.
So now we're asking experts all the questions, sharing what we've learned and what we're still figuring out, and keeping it real along the way. Welcome to What I Wish I Knew. Before we get into today's episode, we want to call out that this conversation includes discussions of pregnancy loss and infertility. So if you're not in a place to hear that right now, please take care of yourself and come back if and when you're ready.
Y'all, this conversation is powerful. We sat down with Dr. Jessica Zucker, psychologist, best-selling author, and the woman behind the I Had a Miscarriage movement, to talk about silence. Specifically, the way that women have been conditioned to stay silent even as they're going through really, really traumatic experiences like miscarriages or infertility. We explore the power that comes with sharing our stories and why it's so important to break the cycle of shame.
So deep breath. This is an important one, and there are a lot of stories to be told. Let's get into it.
Jessica, welcome to What I Wish I Knew, and thank you for giving us the time to talk today.
Well, thank you so much for having me and all the amazing work you're doing.
Thank you. That's a great way to start off the conversation. We're going to talk today primarily, I think, about your second book, Normalize It. Your first book was about the kind of the story of your miscarriage, and this second book, Normalize It, we're going to talk a lot about what's contained within it. I think everyone should read it, and I think it's incredible. Before I ask you what led you to write this book and kind of how it came about, I have to read this quote, which when I was reading the book really struck me, and I think sort of sets the scene for this entire conversation. So the quote is, "Our culture has taught us to be silent about the very things we need to be sharing. The messages we received about our voices and our bodies as girls, depression and anxiety, breakups in intimate and platonic relationships, grief, shame, sexual harassment and abuse, the choice to become a mother, the choice to not become a mother, the pain of wanting to become a mother but having it not work out, and the struggles associated with caregiving, with aging, with our changing bodies. Silence, stigma, shame, repeat."
I'm literally
Like,
crying.
I know.
Tear up again.
I'm so glad you
I
say
mean-
that because I feel emotional, even though, it's funny because when people read my book back to me, it's such a different experience than having written it myself or reading it myself. And I finished writing it so long ago that I don't know. Yeah, it lands so profoundly for me hearing you. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us, what led you to write a book that kind of echoes that message?
Wow. Well, how many hours do you have? I mean, we can go all the way back in time. So I'm a psychologist. I specialize in women's reproductive and maternal mental health, and I've done so for about 15 years at this point. Prior to pursuing my PhD, I worked in international women's health. So I was passionate about all things women, women's health, women's reproductive rights. And so when I started my private practice, I envisioned marrying my background in public health with the clinical. And up until that point, I had no sort of firsthand lived experience that informed my interest. I just all in, fully passionate and really sort of interested in learning about all the things that impact us over the course of our lives. And then 16 weeks into my second pregnancy, I had a miscarriage while I was home by myself. I had to cut the umbilical cord and promptly began to hemorrhage. I was coached by phone by my OBGYN. My husband darted through LA traffic and got to me as quickly as possible. And we made our way to her office. I then, to make matters all the more dramatic and traumatic, ended up undergoing an unmedicated DNC. So I share all of this explicit information to just kind of show you, the birth of my desire to change culture in, I guess, a radical way, but it really shouldn't be thought of, I don't think, as particularly radical. However, the silence, the stigma, and the shame that surround this topic is ubiquitous and, impenetrable, it seems. And so after experiencing this loss firsthand, I then understood my patients from a corporeal perspective. Like I could understand the silence that they talked about, the feelings of alienation that they talked about, the feelings of isolation that they spoke about as well. And so I decided I had to do something about it. So I turned to the research, and of course, I had already kind of been privy to this, but when it was kind of happening to me, I wanted to gather as much information as possible. And it turns out that a majority of women are feeling a sense of self-blame and shame and even body failure in the aftermath of loss. So I decided to write a piece for the New York Times in 2014, which launched the I Had a Miscarriage campaign. So in that piece, I'm sort of holding a sign that says hashtag I had a miscarriage. You can't see my face, because I wanted people around the world to be able to envision themselves holding the sign. And this piece was sort of a compassionate invitation to join me in changing the zeitgeist once and for all when it comes to this topic that's just not going anywhere. I mean, the thing is, there's no cure for pregnancy loss. It's not a disease, right? So approximately 1 in 4 pregnancies results in loss. And so the sooner we start talking about it, the sooner we can feel like we can commune and we can build our communities and feel deeply connected when we need it the most. So that led to my first book, which is called I Had a Miscarriage, a Memoir Movement. And then a few months after that book came out, a mental health publisher came to me and asked me to write a book. And it took me all of 30 seconds to basically know that I had to do this and that I had to say yes and embrace this new assignment, because I realized, wait, this whole time I've been so focused on pregnancy and infant loss and life after, and the silence, the stigma, and the shame that result from it, this kind of trifecta that I talk about. But what about all of the other aspects of girls' and women's lives? What? I realized, wait, this actually applies to everything from menstruation through menopause and then some. Hence, the arrival of Normalize It, and the subtitle is Upending the Silent Stigma and Shame That Shape Women's Lives.
Ugh, that's such a good story.
It's a lot.
I mean,
I feel I've lived many lives, and sometimes people say to me like, "Wait, you've been through so much. Like, I don't understand how you've kind of had the energy to make something of it." But for me, it felt like a lifeline, right? For me, writing has been the most healing and the most connecting of all the things that I've done, even including therapy. Of course, I do that too, and that's incredibly impactful. But writing has just kind of gotten me to deeper places within myself. And because I kind of put it out into the public, I've connected with women globally. And that has really kind of changed me.
It's wild, Jessica. I also had a miscarriage in between my 2 kids, and I decided to share it on our Instagram, and so many people came out in support. And even my mom, it was so interesting. She was like, I didn't know anybody that had a miscarriage before you. But when I told her and when she started sharing it with her friends, suddenly all these women came out and said, I had one and I had one. And, suddenly it was like she found out all these people had experienced the same thing, but they stayed so silent about it. And
Exactly.
my question is like, what is it about women that makes them prone to internalizing shame around things that are just bodily functions or very natural?
Yeah, that's a really important question, and I'm so sorry that you experienced that. And my mother too said that she didn't know of anybody who had had a miscarriage, and then she went digging around a little bit and quickly found exactly what your mom did as well. So that's the thing. Once we share, we learn that, all of these people, our best friend, our neighbor, our aunt, our grandmother, have been there as well. So as I get into and normalize it, I kind of lean into the groundbreaking work of Dr. Carol Gilligan. And her qualitative research found that a majority of girls, once they kind of get to puberty age, begin to, as she calls it, quote unquote, not know what they know. And that I feel is like worth a pause, because the profundity of thinking about all of us going through that is nothing short of heartbreaking, honestly. I think that's where it begins, with this pressure to be perfect, with this pressure to be pretty, but not too pretty, with this pressure to be smart, but not too smart, right? It's like all of these messages that we receive so young. We also receive some of these messages within the context of sex ed, I think, right? We don't hear that some pregnancies don't work out. And we also don't hear that not everybody gets pregnant when they sneeze, right? So in sex ed, we are taught, it's almost like we're taught to be afraid of it, which I understand. I understand they're hoping that kids will, avoid pregnancy and avoid diseases. But I think it would soften the blow as girls become women if we learned early on about fertility struggles, or we learned about the potential of miscarriage. I just don't think we'd be so bowled over, and we wouldn't be looking around going, why have I not heard about this before? And the same thing is happening right now with the explosion of books about menopause and perimenopause. People are like, how did I not know? Why did my mom not tell me? Where was my grandmother? So it's really interesting and incredibly troubling that we don't know about certain things until we're in them. And then, as you pointed out, women tend to convert that to shame. And again, I don't think it's a biological thing. I think it's a learned thing in our society that I'm humbly attempting to kind of, I don't know, make some dent in that if I can in over the course of my life with my writing and talking all about this.
And these things are universal experiences. Like we're not just talking about things that happen in isolation, or, something that doesn't literally happen to every single woman who lives long enough will go through perimenopause and menopause.
Exactly.
Every single woman and girl, if they live long enough, will go through puberty, with very few exceptions. Like, any woman who's trying to get pregnant will go through their own fertility journey, whatever that looks like. It's so dumb, because what's the point of not talking about it? Everyone's going to go through it, and not talking about it only makes it harder for everyone in literally every single way.
I know. So who wins? Like, why is this proliferating? Like, why is this a thing? Is it patriarchy? Is who benefits from our silence? I think it must be that, right? Because then if we're sort of like, ooh, girls start to have body image issues at a pretty young age as well, comparing themselves to the magazine covers, comparing themselves to the billboards. And it starts that young. Should I look like that? What does perfection look like? Should I aim for that? What's wrong with me? Right? So if we are continually questioning ourselves and then putting the onus on ourselves for whatever it is that we navigate, who wins? I don't have the answer, but I think it's something that maybe somebody else can write another book about.
Yeah.
Not me, not me.
You know what I think a lot about? I was raised Catholic. There was a lot of shame around the talk of sex, around the talk of even pregnancy, even like, my dad felt uncomfortable with my 5-year-old daughter playing pregnancy. And it's like, why is that uncomfortable to you? Like, is that from the Catholicism? Is it come from religion, where it's like there's this shame in having sex, and yet I I also don't know. I'm just wondering, sometimes I wonder out loud if it's because of our religion and that we were taught to be pure in that sense.
I think it's like sort of a generational thing as well, because not just about sex, but just anything that feels like it's a little too much. Like you're
Mm-hmm.
being too emotional, you're being too ambitious, you're being, you
Yes.
know, too whatever. And there are obvious conflicts or issues going on within a family, and I was certainly not raised to address them and talk about them in a calm, productive, supportive way. And I would be willing to bet that, Christina, if we, asked 5 of our friends who are roughly our age, they would probably say something along the same lines. Whereas nowadays, I feel like it is a much different culture that we are trying to raise our kids in, around feeling safe to talk to us about anything,
Mm.
and being much more mindful about what we say about ourselves or others in front of them. Like, I'm making a general statement, but
Yes.
I think generationally it's so different than how we were raised.
Yeah, it's really problematic to think about, what you were talking about, in terms of religion. And you're right. I think that it's generational, feeling required to keep things hush hush. What does that do to us, psychologically speaking, when we have to shove important questions, important experiences, big feelings, whether they're good, bad, happy, sad, and everything in between? Shoving is often what leads to what I see in the context of my office: shame, depression, anxiety, lots of different sort of eating disorders, various problems, because we are having to be quiet. And
Not
so,
talking about a feeling doesn't make it go away. It doesn't mean you're not feeling it. You're
yeah,
just not, you have no venue for expressing it or getting help in solving it or processing it or whatever
exactly.
needs to happen with this feeling. Not talking about it doesn't mean that it's not there. You're pretending it's not there. It's still
Right.
there.
And I feel like it actually has the potential to eat us whole when we don't talk about it, right? Because how many
Mhm.
stories can we fit into our little bodies over the course of our lives? So that's really sort of the aim of Normalize It, to invite people in a very sort of tender way to go within, to self reflect, to ask ourselves, are there stories that I've kept tucked inside for various reasons that are important to me, that have shaped the person that I am today, and that perhaps deserves to see the light of day? Now, in no way do I think people have to start a campaign or get on a TED Talk stage or, have something go viral. Absolutely not. So if somebody feels like, I'm a more private person, like I don't want this on the internet, or, I don't want people to hear me talking about this on a podcast, totally understandable. As long as that's coming from a place of, it's not because I feel shame, but it's because I want to keep it to myself. Okay. So how can people who don't want it to be so out there, process their experiences? So, of course, my book takes place within the context of my fictitious office because I'm a psychologist. So, my hope in doing that is that it invites people to try therapy, maybe dip their toe in the water. Therapy can, of course, be an ideal place to process the unprocessed, to find safety with somebody who actually listens with zero judgment about whatever it is we want to share. However, of course, I understand not everybody is interested in therapy for a variety of reasons, and that's okay. So I try to give examples that are within reach, that are accessible, that we can do on our own so that we can't kind of come up with excuses, for lack of a better word, as to why we're not going to share. Oh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I don't want to spend the money. I don't want it to be public. Okay. What about a journal? All you need is a piece of paper and a pen. And my point here is, if we can move our stories through us, we benefit, period. I mean, it is that plain and simple. It doesn't mean by writing it down, you're going to be healed or, free of the pain of what happened necessarily. But it does move it from our heads and our bodies to the page. And sometimes that creates a sense of validation that we have been lacking for years and years, when we've kept something to ourselves that we feel ashamed of, that we feel afraid that other people might judge.
That's actually something I wanted to kind of double tap on from the book, which is the power of storytelling in general, of telling your own story. And I liked, on this podcast, the people we talk to, we always try to ground the conversations in like science-backed, fact-based, expert opinions. And I liked in the book about when you were talking about storytelling and you kind of were just getting into it, like what it's more than just like, oh, it feels good to say it out loud. But sharing your story actually
can change
is so much
the
more.
brain.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I mean, it can really sort of change our physiology, right? Especially when it's in connection with somebody else. When you kind of see somebody mirroring your feelings, or you have somebody responding and there's that authenticity and that you feel safe in that vulnerability, that has an impact.
Jessica, I want to switch over a little bit to, in your book, you were kind of saying you allow the reader to be a fly on the wall of different women experiencing different things and kind of processing things their own way. So I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about some of those different scenarios that are in your book. We've talked a little bit about pregnancy loss, around fertility. What are some of the other, and I think not just because of the book, but in your practice and in, the work that you do, what are some of these other situations where sharing and storytelling around them would really make a huge difference for people?
I would almost say all of them, whatever that means, meaning from menstruation through menopause and beyond, right? So what are the things that happen over the course of our lives? So grief, and that can take many forms. I also include in the book body image and eating disorders, and the pull to perfection and how damaging that can be. And then I also took on platonic and romantic relationships and their end, because that is something, when you think about it, we just don't talk that much about, because there can be a lot of shame in the end of a relationship. And then, as you mentioned, of course, I got really into what is the process of trying to become a mother. So fertility challenges, pregnancy loss, terminations for medical reasons, as well as perinatal and postpartum mood and anxiety disorders, because again, that is happening. I think the statistic right now is 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 women. So there are so many things that we go through that we don't feel entitled to talk about. And so the book is really trying to bring people in. I've gotten a lot of feedback since it's come out. People telling me oh, I couldn't relate to chapter whatever. However, meaning the content of it, the focus of it, but I could really resonate with how the patient was feeling and her expression of those feelings. And so I think that's what makes the book so rich and so raw and so inviting, because you don't have to have gone through the very thing this fictitious patient is talking about. It's actually the fact that they're sitting there with me and unpacking it and trying to really get at the roots of the shame or the roots of the stigma, the silence, or the roots of the complexity of why they haven't shared this prior.
And I think a lot of that comes, or at least a lot of that, and what you've also put in your book is about the shoulds, right? There's this duopoly that I feel like women come across that almost remind you. You wrote something in your book about these should statements that also reminded me. Remember that monologue in Barbie?
Yes. There were women in the theater crying all around me,
But
literally.
I felt the exact same way when I read, what you wrote, which was like, women should be ambitious, but not at the expense of their femininity or their families. Women should be desirable, but not overly confident in their sexual prowess. Like all of these shoulds, like
Yes.
kind of layer on top of each other that makes it really hard to express your true self in a way.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're like suspended in this place of like, who should I be? What should I do? Who am I?
Right. And in what context should I show up for this audience?
Exactly.
And I think then as you go through menstruation, how do you show up in front of your friends who may have gone through it or maybe didn't go through it? Or how do you show up with your mom? Like, I think those things add such a layer of complexity to ourselves in a world that wants to put us in boxes in black and white, right? It's like the closer you get to a person, the more complex they become because of all of this.
Yes.
And what do you think the role of shame kind of plays in that complexity where it's like you feel like you might be too much in a world that wants you to be so much more simple?
I know, but then the world demands of us to be complex and to be dynamic. And so it's so confusing. I think the shame comes when we think we had a hand in it. So I think that we learn as kids that menstruation is gross or bad, that this is in quotes, that blood is dirty and therefore we are dirty, and it symbolizes the potential for fertility and such a, different sort of, a big leap in one's development in terms of could I get pregnant? What does this even mean? And so I think it begins there. And so the shame takes hold. And then, like I said before, about sort of body image, because I think that, menstruation often leads to changes in the body or right before. And so you're kind of comparing yourself to your friends or the billboards. Should I be ashamed that my friend looks differently? Why is this person getting more compliments or has more friends than I do? You know, um, and then this kind of pull for perfection. Where's that even stemming from? It's this sense that, again, you should be your best self, but you shouldn't be too much. So I think, again, like no matter which way you turn, you bump up against shame at some point or another. I, for example, when I had my miscarriage, I didn't feel a sense of shame and I did not feel a sense of body failure or body hatred. Why is that? And I ask myself still to this day how I sort of skirted that. And I think it's because I had already had a healthy child. And I come from a family of doctors, and I think I just kind of went scientific with it. Like I was like, well, it must be that something was wrong with the fetus. Like I think, maybe I was protecting myself, but I also think I just kind of had maybe read enough that I didn't assume it was me, or I didn't assume it was the coffee I had that day or the exercise I did or the orgasm I may have had or whatever, because I do hear a lot of that people think it's something that they did or didn't do. Did I want to be a mother too badly? Did I not want it enough? Was it my ambivalence that created this outcome?
I mean,
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
so
it's
sad.
dizzying, really. I know. It is so sad. And the same thing happened when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and then I was lambasted by all the platitudes that surround that. And that's a whole other topic completely, but you're a warrior, you're going to beat this, um And I did not feel like, what did I do to deserve this? But it did perk me up to thinking more about, do women actually think that they did something to deserve cancer? Do they think they did something to deserve a pregnancy loss? I mean, this is just beyond me. And so soon thereafter, I did learn that there was a chromosomal abnormality with my second pregnancy, and I did learn that I have a gene. And so both things sort of rooted it for me in science, and then made it, like, I think, less personal. But I think if we don't have that information, and a lot of us don't get that information, we are left to circle around in our minds. What did I do? Is it really
Yeah.
something that, I wanted or didn't want, or did do or didn't do, that created this outcome?
And Jessica, I too, after my miscarriage, I felt bad that I didn't feel worse about it. I
Mm,
definitely felt like, my body knew that something was wrong. So this is what happened. I think where I had my issues was how I was treated in the health system, where it was
yeah.
like, I felt like I was really on my own about it. They were like, it'll pass, and you get a doctor's appointment in 3 days, and then you'll get a DNC in 10 days. And I was like, what? And so I ended up going to the ER and having an emergency DNC because of just rapid blood loss. But I felt more silenced by my healthcare team,
Oof, I'm
right? And
so
and the
sorry.
and not silenced in the fact that, like, I couldn't talk about it, but silenced in the fact that, like,
They were
I
telling
wanted
you
somebody
how
to,
it was going to be.
right. And I was like, can somebody hold my hand? Like, can you show a little bit more empathy, right? And, like, you're not alone in this. But it felt really lonely from that point of view. And so,
Yes.
yeah, there's opportunities there for betterment.
Yeah.
Well, that's the point though. You did share that experience. So, like, let's just say someone happened to see that story, that set of stories,
Yeah.
and like I'm the only one who felt like that whole experience was terrible. And then they read that someone else out there, maybe that they don't even know, had this experience. And that's all it takes, I feel like, is like one little step in towards, I'm not the only one. Like,
Yes.
it's not just me. I'm not weird. I'm not crazy. I'm not dumb. I'm not psychotic. I'm not whatever I thought I was for feeling how I was feeling and never talked to anyone about, because this person was brave enough to talk about it. It's just like it manifests more and more like freedom and permission.
Yes, it's like a domino effect, because I saw that happen when I wrote my first New York Times piece. I was sort of bowled over, and I was like numb all day because I was getting all these DMs and emails and whatever from women around the globe. And it just, I couldn't sort of take in the enormity of people who felt that they had kept this to themselves for so long. And I realized, oh, all I did was share my story in this way. And yet then it had this huge effect, this huge ripple effect. And so, is it incumbent upon all of us then to share our stories? In some ways, I feel like it is. But again, for those people who don't want to kind of, be a public figure about it or share it on the interwebs, that's okay too. I think as long as you're whispering in the ear of a neighbor, telling your best friend, searching for a therapist, writing in the journal, whatever it is, I think that helps us feel more connected to ourselves, freer in our lives, and more entitled to feeling our feelings.
As a society, it's not like we are encouraging people to be honest, transparent, and open
Absolutely
about their
not.
feelings, no matter if you're a man or a woman.
Right. It's like we are supposed to be the quote unquote emotional ones. And this is how patriarchy affects all of us. Men are not benefiting from patriarchy in this way either. It's like they are then taught to be stoic. I mean, these are generalizations, of course, but and to hold it all together. And I write about that in my first book. After my miscarriage, I could not locate my husband, emotionally speaking. I was like, what is happening? And finally, we sat down and got into it. And I was like, where have you been? What is happening for you? And he was able to talk about the extreme fear he felt, but that he wanted to focus so much on me and me being okay and my physicality and my, emotional well being, that he, I think, inadvertently didn't make space for himself. And we see that a lot with men and emotions, that they are just kind of not necessarily well versed in what they're even feeling to begin with, because they've been taught to be quiet, don't cry, boys will be boys, boys don't cry, all of these things that really sort of put them in a box and minimize their complexity as well.
And their role as a caretaker, I think, too, as like the protector and caretaker.
Exactly.
I think so.
The pressure around that.
Yeah, exactly. And then it does kind of put their own, not only are they not encouraged to like locate their feelings or communicate their feelings, but also they're being actively told, like, take care of your partner, like take care of your woman, make sure that she's okay. And so, especially when it comes, I think, to fertility, anything related to fertility, that's really tough, right? Because the woman is the one who carries the pregnancy physically.
Yes.
I went through IVF for my second child, and I had to do everything. Like, I'm the one getting the injections. I'm the one taking all of the medicine and hormones. I'm going in every day for the ultrasounds. I'm doing all that. And my husband was incredibly supportive and did everything he thought he could do to support me. But I think he was so focused on he felt so helpless that it
Yes.
wasn't that he couldn't do more, that I think I don't know. I don't think that he really thought about how he felt. He was just, everything was focused on me and making sure the outcome was what we needed and that I had the support I needed. And I bet that's not uncommon
It's
around
really not.
particularly fertility
Exactly.
situations.
No, I know. And it can bubble up those so much resentment within marriages and within partnerships, because I think that then the woman is feeling so alone. Where are you? What are you actually feeling? What are you doing? And yes, you want me to be okay and you're trying to be supportive, but it feels distant when they're also not talking about what they're actually feeling.
Mm-hmm. Christina, you've talked about how your husband felt following the miscarriage, and it was different than how you felt, right? Like, having gone through the experience obviously very differently.
Yeah, well, the one thing that will never leave my mind is, I was in the hospital by myself when I found out I was miscarrying because they wouldn't allow him in. And I remember walking out of the hospital, telling him I was miscarrying, and we just both sobbed together. That makes me emotional thinking about it.
I know.
But we spent like the next week, he took off work, and we spent the next week just walking the dogs and talking about it. And so I feel really fortunate that we were able to both kind of talk about our feelings, but he also felt helpless, right? Like, he control what was happening. And but the positive thing that came out of it, this was an unintended pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
We accidentally got pregnant. We accidentally get pregnant, I would say, a lot, 2 times, which is why, like, stay away from me until, like,
she's the one, if she sneezes,
Oh,
she gets
yeah.
pregnant.
Okay.
But it made us realize that we wanted a second, right? Like, this was a surprise. And then to lose it, it was like, you know what? Actually, I think a second kid would be lovely. And she's here and she's smiley. And, so it was nice to process that together.
That makes me emotional. I'm so glad you brought that up because, in my book, my first book, I talk about how some people actually feel a sense of relief. I'm not saying that you did, but when people get pregnant and they weren't expecting to, and then they have a miscarriage, there can be so many different feelings. They can feel relieved. They can feel really sad. Like, actually, I wanted that, even though I didn't know I wanted that. Or, like you're saying, it can inspire you to really think more deeply and get going on trying again, because you're like, actually, we want to expand our family. So this is the reason why our culture needs to change with regard to this topic, because look at how complex it is. Look at how nuanced it is. And when we don't feel like we can share just how, nuanced it can be within our relationships, within our own selves, we end up feeling like something's wrong with us, or like, we can slip into a shame cycle that wouldn't necessarily be there if culture let us air our dirty laundry out loud. It's not really dirty laundry, it's just laundry.
The last thing that we ask all of our guests on What I Wish I Knew is, what's something that you wish you knew about parenthood, especially now that you're entering the teenage years?
Oh, well, what I wish I knew was that parenthood is a real sort of opportunity to reparent in a sense, parts of yourself that you feel weren't nurtured during your own childhood. There also, of course, it's an opportunity to be very triggered by things that perhaps you didn't know that you had pain points about, and then you realize you do when you're in the throes of a tantrum or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I wish that I had a guidebook, but not really a book. I wish I had sort of a fairy godmother, for lack of a better image, who really sort of walked me through what this would be like and could tell me along the way that I was doing a good enough job, and to reassure me that, this concept that Donald Winnicott came up with, the good enough mother, is real, that we can go through ruptures with, in the context of these relationships, but that the repair is really the most important thing, and that we have the opportunity to circle back with ourselves and with our children to make things feel a bit more communicative or a bit calmer in the context of certain kinds of conversations.
I love that. Every day's a new day.
That's true. It's an opportunity.
Jessica, thank you so much. Where can people find you and read your books and all the things?
Okay, people can find me on Instagram at I Had a Miscarriage. They can find me on my website at drjessicazucker.com. And my books can be found everywhere books are sold.
Highly recommend.
Thank you so much. That book was life-changing. This conversation was amazing. Let's meet for coffee and wine and keep talking
Yes,
forever.
let's do it. Yes, please. I would love it. Thank you so much for having me.
If you found something helpful, insightful, or just plain reassuring in this episode, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you have a moment, leaving a quick review helps more parents find us.
We're also always looking for great guests, so if you know someone or that someone is you, please reach out. You can find us at whatiwishiknew_ or whatiwishiknew.life.
Thanks for listening. And until next time, stay sane, stay calm, or at least fake it until bedtime.